Hello, and welcome back to the Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we speak the truth. We refuse to accept the lies about toxic masculinity and all the garbage that today's culture spews out. We're not afraid to be what we're created to be, made in the image of God, strong, dominant alpha males. Today's subject, an important one, and a request from one of the patrons, P. Baker. Appreciate the suggestion. It is a good topic and very important. I'll plug in the bio. If you want to skip it, you can skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds in. It's about 7 fast forward clicks if you're listening on iTunes. Before you go ahead and hit that fast forward, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review of the podcast. Check out goodshepherdtraining.com. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. Today's topic is going to be on emergency medicine. Now, you heard my bio. You can imagine that in the military and police, I had quite a bit of emergency medical training. Also, I don't generally mention in the bio, but I was a lifeguard. With that being said, I am not a doctor. I am not an EMT. I am not even a TCCC certified instructor. I have had TCCC training. We'll get into what that is. But again, I am not a doctor, and that stuff changes all the time. You should seek out your own professional training. I am telling you my training and experience, the things that I have been taught. I'm telling you to seek real, actual training firsthand from somebody that is a certified medical trainer. Because a lot changes in the medical and emergency medical field. It changes all the time. Remember back in the day, and some of you guys may remember, when I first learned like emergency medicine, it was ABCs: airway, breathing, and circulation. Now there's the March algorithm, which we'll get into later. I think a lot of us who listen to this podcast are into preparedness, being prepared, survivalism. And I know for myself, I've been carrying a gun since some of my earliest memories are walking around the woods with a gun. And I've been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. Most of you guys know there's a whole separate podcast called Gunfighter Life. So obviously I gravitate towards the tactical. I'll be honest. I really like guns. I kind of have a passion for guns and shooting. I don't really have a passion for medical. But there have been times where I have needed it. Whether you have a passion for it or not, I believe every alpha male should have at least a base understanding of emergency medicine so you can save your life or somebody else's life. That recently has been very important to me, because I had a very severe injury earlier this year I guess now it was last year. But where I literally almost died. I had my femoral artery torn open in 2 different places, and I struggled to stay conscious and get somewhere and get help. By God's grace, he got me through that alive, and I give him all the credit. But I was thankful for the training I had in the past that did come into play. That's not the first time I've been fortunate enough to save other people in the past. As an alpha male, don't rely on other men. Part of being an alpha male is being ready in all aspects, and I think emergency medicine is part of that. If you're like me and you gravitate towards a tactical thing, and you're always thinking about, what are the best sights for this new gun that I have, or, is this 124 grain bullet better ballistically than 147 grain bullet, and all the minutia of that. That could be something different for you. You could be, that way with cars and engines and all kinds of stuff. But what I'm saying is a good alpha male is prepared in a lot of different aspects. And this is part of that. So even if you don't have a passion for it, seek it out. Learn at least a base understanding of it. I guarantee if it's you or a loved one, you're going to have a passion for it in the moment in which you had the training. I'll start off with what I learned way back, when I was a lifeguard. Survey the scene. That comes first. Survey the scene. This comes into play as a lifeguard. It comes into play on a vehicle accident. It definitely came into play when I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. It was really hard for my guys. It was one of the hardest things to train out of them in our scenario training, on our force-on-force training. With simunition rounds, we're actually getting shot and it hurts. We would do scenarios where our men or little children or women have as actors would be screaming and screaming for help. Our guys naturally would stop and try and help them, bandage them up, put tourniquets on. But, that was not our job. Our job was to stop an active shooter. We were an active shooter response team, an SRT team. If there's an active shooter, there was in our city that killed 50-something people, and we stop every time we see somebody that needs medical assistance, how many more people is that guy going to kill while we're trying to save 1 or 2 other people? Our job is to stop the threat first. Like I said, it's very hard to do sometimes. You have to weigh the pros and the cons. Sometimes it is as simple as, I may have put a tourniquet on 1 person, but in that process, 12 other people got shot because I was delayed in getting to where I needed to go, because that wasn't my primary mission. It may be equally hard for you. I'm not telling you every circumstance is different. If there's somebody with a life-threatening injury and you rush in and you get a life-threatening injury, have you helped anything or have you made it worse? A real clear example of this is you come across a vehicle accident and, there's a vehicle that hit a power pole in a rainstorm, and there's a down power line that's exposed and the guy's getting electrocuted. You're going to rush into that puddle of water and try and pull that guy out? Well, no, because you're both going to get fried by that electricity. Survey the scene first, make it safe, maybe get a limb, maybe get something that's non-conductive and push that electrical cable out of that water or do what you have to do. But if you don't survey the scene first and just rush in, you didn't help that person and it just hurt you. And then the person that comes on the scene that has to save him also has to save you. Which not only are you in trouble, but he's in more trouble because that person's not going to be able to be helped as fast. So again, survey the scene, make the scene safe. Scene survey is always first. If you are doing room clearing, urban warfare, like in Iraq, and you are going down a hallway and you see one of your colleagues shot in the center of the room and you need to go save him, you still clear the corner, because if he's bait and you just rush in, you get shot in the back of the head, you didn't help anything. Survey the scene. Make the scene safe. There's been a lot of sad tragedy to come out of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that I started fighting straight out of high school 20 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. There have been some good things. We've had a lot of real-world experience in the things that actually kill people, things that actually cause death in emergency medicine. We've had a lot of time to study that and a lot of time to improve equipment. You may not believe this, but when I went to war in Iraq, the average Marine, we didn't even carry tourniquets on us. That wasn't even a thing that we did. There was still this myth that if you put a tourniquet on, you were going to lose that limb. It wasn't even a thing that we carried. We carried very basic IFAKs, like an Israeli bandage. And that was basically it. Emergency medicine, partially because of the wars in Iraq and the amount of raw data, good training and good medics, has come a long way. As I said, we went from the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. And again, I did receive TCCC. It's a great course. I think you should look into it if you can afford it, if you have the time, but even just stop the bleed class. But I am not a TCCC instructor. I'm going to go over with you what I learned, some of the things that I learned in TCCC. That stands for Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Again, I went from airway being the number one thing you checked, breathing, circulation. The number one thing being M in the March algorithm stands for, I think it actually stands for mass hemorrhage, but I always think of it as massive bleeding, like a massive amount of bleeding that you have to stop. That is a major cause of death on the battlefield and car accidents and things like that. Lose enough blood, you die. On a limb, the number one way to stop that is a tourniquet. No, you don't necessarily lose the limb. You may lose a limb because of the injury that you sustained that made you put on the tourniquet. The tourniquet is not necessarily going to cause you to lose a limb. It can be on there for several hours. Kind of the number one gold standard is the CAT tourniquet. They're great. I advise you to have a couple of those. I have one in my car. My wife has one in her car now, after my accident. A CAT is a better tourniquet. There's also the soft T. There's also the SWAT tourniquet. Getting into the ins and outs of those, I'm not a medical professional. There's also the RAT tourniquet, which I will admit is not as good as the CAT tourniquet for a lot of things. It is good in the fact that you can put it on infants and animals, which is not the case for the CAT. But I would say it is not as good, especially for self-aid. Using on yourself, it does not have its own built-in windlass. I carry a RAT tourniquet because it's the biggest one I'm willing to carry on me all the time. It is part of my EDC. Those of you guys that are patrons that get an inside look at the EDC that I carry will know that I carry one of those in a Blue Force Gear magazine pouch. It goes on my belt. I usually carry a spare magazine. It goes right beside it. It really doesn't weigh a ton. It's small. CAT tourniquet is better, but I'm not going to carry it all the time. I don't walk around with cargo pants from day to day. Tourniquet, I'll secede, is better, but are you going to carry it with you all the time? If you are, that's great. If not, a RAT tourniquet's certainly better, certainly way better for me than not having a tourniquet. And there's probably a dozen other tourniquets, but those are the big ones. The CAT, which is usually the gold standard, the RAT, the soft T, the SWAT. And there's also improvised tourniquets. They're not as good as an actual tourniquet, but they work, trust me, I know firsthand. A belt and some kind of windlass, whether that's a spare magazine, whether that's an ice scraper for your car, whether that's a small dumbbell at the gym, something to crank that sucker down and stop the flow of blood. That's what a tourniquet is. Whatever kind it is, whatever it is, it's something you use to constrict your artery, your blood vessels, to stop the flow of blood so that you don't die. Your body needs a certain amount of blood. Once you go below that, you very quickly deteriorate. That's what a tourniquet does. A tourniquet, again, is how generally we stop massive bleeding in an extremity. Obviously, you can't put a tourniquet on your neck or on your torso or things like that. You're going to have things like quick clot, pressure bandages, and chest seals. Really can't get into all that on this podcast. You really need a visual. You really need to get training, actually. But if not training, at least watch some videos. This is an audio format, and some things aren't great in audio. But a chest seal, like a sucking chest wound, getting shot in the chest. I hope all you alpha males are carrying guns from day to day. If so, you ought to know how to deal with getting shot in a limb, getting shot in a chest, in a torso. That's obviously a very real thing. Chest seals, pressure bandages, quick clot, stop bleeding on things other than extremities, for something that doesn't require a tourniquet, like a large gash or something. Airway, the classic Heimlich maneuver, the classic finger sweep, somebody's choking on something. Obviously, people need to breathe to live. Know how to do a simple finger sweep for airway, clear an airway. That rolling somebody on their side so that they can get obstructions out of their airway themselves. Knowing the Heimlich maneuver, knowing how to do a Heimlich maneuver on yourself. If you're somewhere and there's nobody else around, can you clear your own airway? Obviously, breathing is important. I should cover, if you're going to learn that, learn how to also do a Heimlich on a baby, on a small child. I feel pretty bad if you touted yourself to be an alpha male and you didn't even know how to do CPR on a choking infant. So I'd encourage you to know how to do that. CPR cert is not hard to obtain. The R in the March algorithm gets into respiration. That's where you're going to like our occlusive dressings, our sucking chest wounds, our putting on a one-way ventilation for a sucking chest wound. That really goes beyond the scope of today. I'm not at all going to try and teach you how to do that. I just would encourage you to learn how to do that and know how to do that. Circulation, that's the C in the March algorithm. Doing stuff like the pulse once you get the massive bleeding down, other types of smaller wounds and bleeding. And the last one, the H, a lot of people don't think of this, especially in warm climates, but hypothermia. If you don't know, if you lose blood, you can very easily go into hypothermia even at normal room temperatures. You don't have to be in 30 degrees. The more blood you lose, the easier it is to go into hypothermia. I can say from experience as somebody that's lost a massive amount of blood, you get real cold real quick. Miserably cold, uncontrollably cold. We talked about tourniquet, survival blankets are cheap and they're light. They don't take up a lot of room. I think you ought to have a couple of those. They really do work. I have been stuck on a mountain in really cold environments and was very, very thankful to have one of those survival blankets. They're not by any means the equivalent of a tent or a shelter or a sleeping bag, but they can certainly do a lot for the weight that they provide. A lot of good medical kits have those in there. But just knowing that if somebody's lost blood or somebody is in trauma, that you need to put a coat on them or you put your jacket on them or put them somewhere warm. Obviously excluding a heat casualty. It amazes me with the stuff that kids learn in school. I might go off on a little tangent here, but the things they don't learn in school, like how to change a tire on a car, or, why doesn't every kid graduate with a basic CPR certificate, or why doesn't every kid get some kind of trauma medicine training? They'll put them through sex ed, but they won't teach them how to save a life. Seems a little weird to me. But you don't have any excuses. You're not a kid. You're an alpha male. So learn how to save a life. I hope that you never need it, but you may need it for yourself or somebody else. We talked a little bit about tourniquets, talked a little bit about chest seals, pressure bandages. Kind of the classic one is an Israeli bandage. There are better things now. Not bad to have a couple Israeli bandages. They're super cheap. Knowing how to apply pressure with the bandage, though, is the basic rule of thumb for those things. Knowing how to pack a wound. That's something we didn't really learn, like I said, when I went to war in Iraq initially. It's very prevalent now, and it's part of TCCC, where they give you a fake leg and you have to it measures the pressure to make sure you can stop the bleeding, like pressing on an artery or vein and packing it. Learning how to pack a wound with gauze. Gauze is cheap. Gauze is easy to use. If you know how to pack a wound with strips of gauze, getting the bleeding stopped. Things like quick clot, things that stop the bleeding. There's just like powdered quick clot. There's all manner of things that do that. There's gauze with quick clot in it. And there's EMTs that know way more about this than me. One thing's better than another for this and for that. I would say know how to use a pressure dressing, know how to pack a wound. So you guys know, if you've listened a while, I encourage you to support the podcast because these are not free to produce on Patreon. There are two people on my Patreon. One is Viking Preparedness and one is Bear Independent. Bear Independent is kind of the owner and founder of Refuge Medical, who makes IFAKs. I support his message. I don't agree with everything he says, but I, by and large, agree with his beliefs more than most. I think they generally align with the truth, with the Word of God. Anyway, check out Refuge Medical. Check out Bear Independent. If you're looking for IFAKs, that's what sparked this episode, somebody asking about IFAKs. Bear Independent Refuge Medical makes an IFAK. They make a lot of medical kits. The bare minimum, but the IFAK is kind of the standard. I'll read to you what's in their IFAK. Gen 7 Cat Tourniquet, Hemostatic Gauze, Trauma Shears, Full-size Twin Pack Hyphen Chest Seals, a Nasopharyngeal Airway, 6 Emergency Trauma Dressings, a Burn Dressing, an Abdominal Pad. Actually, I think it says 3 abdominal pads. A triangle bandage. Now that's a classic we had way back in the Marine Corps and comes in handy for a lot of things. A triangle bandage, compressed gauze. Again, survival blanket. So I mean this kit was put together well. A survival blanket. 4x4 gauze, 2x2 gauze. There's 2 of each of those. 3-inch rolled gauze, which again we talked about you're going to use for packing wounds once you learn how to do that. Eye shield. iPad, gauze, flat duct tape, and duct tape comes in handy for a lot of things, medical and otherwise. 1-inch medical tape, a pair of gloves, antiseptic towelettes. That really is a great kit, and that is far, far better than what I had going into war in the Marine Corps, which is scary. And I think it's far better than what Marines and Army are currently issued. It's a great kit. And I don't have any reason to recommend any other kits. I think that's probably as good or better than any out there. And I don't know that Bear Independent even knows who I am, but I'm going to recommend him. I think that's a great kit. Wish I had those going into Iraq. It seems very well thought out, and from the horrible medical situations I've had to deal with, I think that kit would have come in handy in a lot of them. And the last part, the gloves. Are kind of important. That's one thing every cop carries on him. You know, gloves, the kind of rule we learn in Teachable C, if it's wet and it's sticky and it's not yours, don't touch it. You know, it's good to want to help somebody, and I don't think it would stop me from helping somebody, but in large parts of populations, you know, hepatitis A, B, and C, those are a thing. A lot of other bloodborne pathogens are a thing. Obviously, if you're dealing with somebody with massive bleeding, that's a thing. And I guess we should cover at the end of this CPR. I assume everybody knows CPR, but I guess I shouldn't assume that. If you don't know CPR, learn CPR, get your CPR certificate. You know, stop the bleeding and keep somebody breathing. If you can keep them from bleeding out and keep them breathing until somebody with more training arrives, I would encourage that. Something that I like to have that is not mentioned here, and I can't actually recommend that you administer, but I'll say that professionals administer it, a massive dose of antibiotics quickly. I'm going to tell you how to get antibiotics. I would just tell you that look into it. Antibiotics are an important thing to have. Nowadays, if you go to an ambulance, they're probably going to give you a massive dose, but if you foresee a future where you might not be able to get to an ambulance or to a hospital, let's just say that historically, infection has killed a lot of people. So having antibiotics and knowing how to use them and writing the doses down maybe on the bottle might not be a bad idea. Oh, and my wife chimed in. They are not good forever. They do expire. Keep in mind, the expiration dates on there are arbitrary. They did tests in the Army where they test their antibiotics after like several decades and they were mostly still good. They will lose a little bit of effectiveness. Better to have some than none, and you should replenish them from time to time. I really hope this has made you consider being more medically prepared and more medically trained. I'll admit that, like I said, it's not my passion. I probably should have some more medical equipment with all the tactical equipment that I have. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to say thanks for listening to this episode of the Alpha Male Podcast. Tactical tip of the day, if I haven't mentioned it before, as that alpha male, you should know your blood type. I would advise writing your blood type on your boots, on your shoes. Unless you wear something like shiny, black business dress shoes, but if you wear any kind of boots or tennis shoes or something, on the back of the shoe, write your blood type. You may know your blood type, but you may not be conscious. It was one of the few things I remembered when I finally got to medical care after my femoral artery was tore up in a couple places. I remember telling them my blood type and asking if it was okay if I lost consciousness. I was fighting hard to stay conscious, and as soon as they gave me the go-ahead, I passed out and don't remember anything until, quite a while later when they put some blood into me. But writing your blood type on your shoe, like I said, if you have any kind of shoe where you can write the blood type, your pants probably hang over it anyway, especially if it's boots or even sneakers. The back of your pants probably fall over there. And if not, is anybody really going to care that you write, A positive, that's my blood type, on the back of your tennis shoe? Having it on there really could help if, again, somebody comes across you and you're unconscious. Quick tactical tip, write your blood type on your shoe. You may want to write it on your belt. Certainly, I made my guys, it was our SOP that they would write it on their cummerbund, on their body armor. If you wear body armor or have body armor, write your blood type on the cummerbund of your body armor. If you do ever need that body armor, and you do get an injury that goes through or around or somewhere other than protected by your body armor, go to rip that thing off. At least they'll know their blood type, hopefully. That was kind of our SOP when I was a tactical commander. They had it on the cummerbund on their body armor, and they had it on their boot. With that, guys, like I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an EMT. Perhaps somebody in the audience would like to come on the Alpha Male Podcast that knows more than me, that is like a certified instructor and do better at this. I don't pretend to be the best at everything. That's not what being an alpha male is. A big part of being an alpha male is knowing how to delegate. So if you have more experience, if you're legit and you want to talk about this, get a hold of me. That's a good segue into, if you want to get a hold of me, again, goodshepherdtraining.com, goodshepherdtraining.com. There's merchandise on there. If you like the tactical stuff, you may check out Gunfighter Life. If you care about the important stuff, you may check out Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. If you want to help support this message, if you want to suggest content, like I said, this was a Patreon suggestion, go to Good Shepherd Training. There's a Patreon link on there. If you have it in your heart to give, and if not, don't feel guilty. But patrons do get special content. Again, they get to chat with me. They get to suggestions for episodes. They get to see pictures of my pocket dump EDCs. They get, practical shooting drills that I put out on there. Enough of that. We'll get into wrapping up the episode. We give a tactical tip of the day. I also like to give a tactical verse of the day. Something that dovetails well with today's episode. Do not spread slanderous gossip among your people. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is threatened. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19. With that, men, get out there, be strong, prove yourself a man. Have a blessed day.